So you have to keep all the kids. No, you don't have to do that.
Morning, guys. Hey.
Morning.
Morning, Bobby. I think Chris Justice has our invitation.
I do. All right. Let's bow our heads. Walk with us, God. Our trek is not always easy. Our vision is short-sighted. Our love often hidden. May we seek the deeper places where our compassion, our joy reflect you, the God who is love. Amen. Yeah. Please join me to say the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Of the things we think, say, and do,
Is it true? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Chris, you got a Rotary moment?
just that.
That was it. Sean, where are you? No, I saw Chuck. Chuck here. Where is he? Mary, where's Chuck? Oh, look, there he is. He's just not listening to me.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
We have 43 Gate City Rotarians here today. And we also have, our speaker happens to be a Rotarian. He's from Cary Rotary. Bobby Christensen has a slew of guests here today. Bobby.
We'll have time for our speaker after I introduce my guest. Let's start with Dr. Nicholson. Stand up. It's Dr. Charles Nicholson and his son Michael. Dr. Nicholson's a former Rotarian, a retired surgeon from Morehead City, longtime pilot, owned numerous airplanes, had a charter service, and he's now the FAA medical examiner in this area, so we all see him frequently to stay legal and healthy. From time to time we go get a $300 hamburger somewhere, we'll go fly somewhere and have lunch. So, Dr. Nicholson, his son Michael, Michael can tell you everybody that took off and landed yesterday and everybody that's scheduled to come in today. And wherever Dr. Nicholson goes, Michael's right there with him. Every day is a great day. And then I have Greg, stand up. There's Greg Laughlin. Greg grew up with me at Guilford College. He grew up next door to Bennett. Actually, you can see the post And Tommy lived 2 doors down. He's lived in the area for many years, professional photographer, and he's always been had his own business and taking great pictures. Take a good picture of your airplane. Greg, welcome. And then Dave Chestnut. Dave is a retired engineer with Cross Sales and Engineering.
Not engineer, sales engineer.
Sales engineer. A long-time pilot, still instructing out at Air Harbor, and he forgot more than most people remember about airplanes. And Dave was a Rotarian some years ago at Southern Pines. Rotary. So welcome, Dave.
That's his table.
Okay, Dale Meltzer has a guest here today.
Oh, this is Adam Morrison, and he works in my office. He was in the military, in the Army, Special Forces Artillery, and went to school at Bethel University in Tennessee. I forget which city, Nashville? Near Nashville? Right. And he's looking for a Rotarian home.
Good.
So,
Great.
Guy Robondo has a guest today.
Yeah, I introduced Jim last time. I just wanted to say he's now on Cheryl's radar, so hopefully we can rope him in here. So
Breakfast is pretty good.
And finally, we have 3 prospective prospective members here today. I believe they all have their applications in, and hopefully we'll see them here on a regular basis. And when I call your name, if you'll please stand up. Some of their sponsors are here, some are not. First of all, Judy Brumley, who's being sponsored by Darlene. Tony Villier, who works here at the O. Henry, sponsored by Sheriff Davis. And finally, Daniel McCoy, who's being sponsored here by Chris.
Fantastic. Thanks, Chuck. Some announcements today. This is the last week I'm dragging these cookbooks in. If you don't get one today, you're going to have to come to my house and get one. So if you bought a cookbook, they're up here after the meeting. Ralph, don't talk about it real quick.
Our launch is going to be this week. We've got some matters we just want to, logistical matters we want to button up before the next. What's that? I will tell you this, we've got an outstanding event planned this year. The raffle tickets, we should blow it out of the water. We've got, thanks to Dan again, we've got the big screen TV entertainment center. We've got a super prize package. It's going to include items like a 50-person private oyster roast at your house. It's going to include 4 VIP Wyndham passes to the clubhouse and everything. It's going to have a stay at the Grand Over, certificates to restaurants, free dinners. I mean, it's good. And this isn't a bunch of raffle items. This is one raffle ticket. So they're going to be easy to sell. The tickets are fairly priced. So next week we'll have flyers, hopefully, possibly tickets to be issued. So it's going to be a good year, guys. It's going to be a real good year.
May 14th, right?
May 14th.
Okay.
I
Dale,
won't let you forget that date.
Dale, you have something? No, Dale, where's Dale?
Dale.
This is Dale.
Yeah, service-wise, we're going to probably be doing that street cleanup the 12th, which is, I believe, not this coming weekend, but the following, unless it's 20 degrees. But we'll talk about that next week, kind of get a prognosis there. I'm going out to Camp Carefree tomorrow, meet with Lynn and look at about a half a dozen different projects. If anybody care to join me, I'm going to be out there at 10:30. They can ride me up there or meet me up there, so just let me know.
What are you thinking for Carefree?
What now? That's kind of also something I want to discuss. I know we got the fundraiser. I don't want to, just cloud the issue with that. We can do whatever you guys think. Do you want to wait till after?
I think we're good.
Okay.
I just wondered if you had something in mind.
No.
We're good. Jimmer.
Ask all past presidents grants. I'd like to have them in by Saturday if I could. Email would be great. I think we've got 8 requests. So there's probably room for a couple more. If somebody else has a thought. The rules are you as a Rotarian must be directly involved in the project, and it needs to be some charitable project that's going on that helps our local community. So not many rules, and past presidents will get together and we'll decide quickly and hand out some cash. Thank you. Our budget's about $10,000 this year. So.
Fantastic. Erica.
Yes, so Ryla, the application process ends on March 15th, so if you know someone who's interested in being a part of that program, please let me know. And also, we're still in need of 2 host families for our foreign exchange students. So if you know someone who would like to entertain a teenager for about 3 months, please be sure to let me know. I know my phone's going to ring off the hook now, but.
We're looking for Grimsley, preferably?
Yes, preferably Grimsley District, or at least the willingness to transport the student back and forth.
Erica, do you know the weeks for the rally yet?
I don't, but I'll send that email. I can't remember the date. I think it's in July, but I don't remember the exact date. I'll send that email again today with the dates. Yes. Same place.
Kelly, how we doing district conference?
Oh, gosh.
How was your trip, Kelly? That was great.
That's my happy dollar buster. I was going to watch it. Honduras was great. Thank you. If you've not been on a mission trip, I encourage you to set it aside in your life. It's, you get more out of it than you give. I would encourage you to have done it. Max is doing one, I think, in October. He just sent an email out. So if anybody wants to jump on board with Max. District conference. Who's signed up for district conference? Let me see you raising hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I think there's a couple more. Just as a reminder for district conference, if you have never been to district conference and you are signed up, The club has set aside $1,000 to split equally among the new people that are going to go. So who has not been before and is going by the show of hands we just had?
Rodriguez, so far,
So we're going to give Guy $1,000.
That's
Yeah,
right.
I think we do have a couple of. I think we had 9, our goal was 10. Would love to see a couple more go. Even if you can only come up for a night, drive up early Saturday morning, get there by the time the show starts, and spend the night Saturday night. I mean, if you can't come both nights, understandable, but come up and experience District Conference. It's where the rubber hits the road for Rotary. I think it all comes together for new Rotarians when you are able to see what these 55 clubs or 50 clubs in our district do around the world. It will, you will walk out of there high on Rotary for sure. So hope you'll encourage you to sign up. Also, giving away, everybody that signs up before March, well, I'll extend it through next week. Anybody that signs up this week, by next Thursday, putting your name in a hat for a night at Grandover with you and another couple and all the frills. So
Howard gets $1,000 in a night at Rotary.
One last thing that Rusty reminded me of, the meals for food packing at C3 Church is this Saturday at 1 o'clock.
Very good. Chip, did you have something?
I was going to say that the trip to the Greenbrier can be done in 3 hours and 4 minutes on a Friday afternoon, and be done in 2 hours and 57 minutes if you come back on a Monday morning.
If you have a good attorney. That's right.
It's not 4 hours.
Dale, we got some birthdays this week?
Yeah, I
Fantastic.
do. And I want to go over the things I missed last week because my computer wasn't working or Wi-Fi. It turned out it was my Wi-Fi. Okay, Michael Allen had a birthday on the 27th of February. Last week. And Chuck and Dorothy on the 27th had a 45th wedding anniversary. Yeah. And Blake Hunt, on the 1st of March, he had his 18th anniversary as a member of Rotary. All right.
They announced your birthday last week?
Birthday.
She did a couple weeks ago.
March 6th. It's his birthday. Oh.
We'll call him.
Well, still on the list, okay. March the 5th is the first member anniversary for Charles Alexander and Chris Neal. So, that's it for this week.
So that's the Ashley, as far as I know. The club is not feeling well. Buster, we got any happy dollars today?
We have got happy dollars.
Fantastic.
Twice.
I can feel it.
Where are they?
Well, I did something I swore I'd never do. I was looking for a new certified pre-owned car, and apparently with airbag recalls, they're hard to find, so I ended up buying one that's only got 500 miles on it, so technically I have a new car for the first time since 1991. Accuracy on it.
I thought you were going to say a Volkswagen deal.
But I got three. I'll make it quick. Basically, we had a nice article in the paper yesterday about children in Vietnam.
Yes.
And the biggie was we got our co-sponsored club in Australia, so our global grant's off and running. And at home, Katie is a finalist for a full ride at Wake Forest. So we are.
Before somebody busts me, this last week my son was in a newspaper. His name's Guy Rabondo. So he's on a high school triathlon team, and they read an article on it. This guy, the club it's called E3. He started a high school triathlon team. My son's only 14 in 8th grade, but he brought him in. He's competitive. He can run about a 5-minute mile. Bike about 20 plus miles an hour, so we'll see what happens.
All right. Very good.
Buster, every now and again in my line of work, for those of you who may not know, I'm an investment advisor planner. I have a client ask me a question that I just don't know the answer to, and so whenever that happens, as the case was this week, I turned to Grandpappy Lewis.
There you
And a client called me and wanted to know, I've got my third of 3 daughters getting married, and I'm 75, and I want to know, should we buy wedding insurance? And so I said, well, I don't know, I'll check it out. And I was going to call Kraft Insurance, but you know what they'd say.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I called Grandpappy Lewis, and he said, son, how long have you been married? And I said, 43 and a half, 44 years. And he said, well, what kind of insurance did your folks have, or did your folks have on you? And I said, well, such a long time ago. And he said, I bet it was a double-barrel shotgun. Tell the man to sit down and take his shotgun. It doesn't need the insurance.
Buster, I just realized that today is a great opportunity to ask a question that I've often wondered. My dad, too, was a pilot. And one time he told me that there are old pilots and there are bold pilots, but there are no old, bold pilots. I was just wondering if you guys could tell me if that was true or not.
None of us are born.
All you need is the same number of landings as takeoff.
The
blue side up.
Isn't the last landing that might get you?
Bobby, I would add to that, takeoffs are optional, but landings are mandatory.
All we do is Bobby tell airplane jokes. We go 30 minutes on that game.
Well, Grandpappy always said that telling somebody you should go to bed and you'll feel better in the morning is literally the human equivalent of, have you tried turning your computer off and turning it back on?
Bobby, you want to come and introduce our special guest this morning?
Well, we have a very special guest speaker this morning, and I'm sure you've seen Chris's email, but Wilbur Wright is with us. Any of you familiar with the Wright Brothers Memorial down east? Wilbur comes to us today through a medium, and that medium is a man named Paul Carr, who was there in the Cary Club, and actually a college mate of Dale Hopkins, so Dale put me on to Paul's Wilbur Wright history lesson.
If he does really good, he's my best friend. If he screws the pooch, we try to get him.
Paul is a retired Air Force colonel and currently a Delta Airlines pilot flying international routes. He's got over 20,000 hours in the air. And in his spare time, he's an avid sports baseball fan, and he founded the Miracle League of the Triangle, a baseball league for special needs children. He's a lover of baseball, as I said, and a lover of history. So welcome Wilbur Wright through Paul.
Well, today I am indeed Wilbur Wright, and I'm from Dayton, Ohio, and people call me a businessman. Indeed, I've had many businesses, a number of jobs, and a lot of hobbies, but I prefer to think of myself as an inventor, but more than that, a seeker of knowledge, just for the pure joy of discovery. Now, my earliest memory was a book that my father had on ornithology. And that was my first recollection of this thrill that I had about flying. But you know, long before I came along, long before my brother Orville came along, well, this isn't, no, I know what it is.
percent of stuff.
Long before Orville came along, in fact, as long as there have been people, they dreamed about the possibility of flying. They looked at birds and wondered how it might be to fly over oceans and mountains and trees. And they had never done it, so they made up stories about it, or drew pictures, or made up legends. One of the earliest was around the year 700, about Daedalus and Icarus, two men trapped on an island in the Mediterranean, and to try to escape from the island, Daedalus the father constructed wings made from bird feathers and wax and string. And he warned his son Icarus not to fly too high, but Icarus became so fascinated with the power and the feeling of flying that he forgot. And he zoomed up too high, flew too close to the sun, and the wings melted, and Icarus crashed into the ocean. In the Middle Ages, around the year 1500, Leonardo da Vinci, better known as an artist, drew pictures of flying machines. And around here, in the year 1700, there was a Native American in the eastern part of North Carolina named Ron Comack, or they called him the Great Conjurer. He was the magic man, or the witch doctor for his tribe of Native Americans. And it was said that Ron Comack would stand on the banks of the Salmon River, and he would wave a magic stick in the air 3 times, speak an incantation, and then he would be levitated or flown across the Salmon River. You see, even the Native Americans right here in North Carolina dreamed about flying. And so did I. My father was Bishop Milton Wright of the United Church of the Brethren. My mother's name was Susan Corner Wright. And I had 2 older brothers, Rushlin and Lauren. I was born in April of 1867. Orville was born in August 1871. And our little sister Catherine, 1874. We called her Sturchens, the German word for sister. When Orville was born, I was only 4. I couldn't say the word brother very well. It just came out Bobo. So that became his nickname. And they called me Eulum, or Yules, the German word for William or Wilbur. Now, we lived at number 7 Hawthorne Street in Dayton, Ohio. And we all went to public schools. But my father believed that the education one received at home was just as important, and probably more so, than what he received in school. So to that end, he filled our house with books. We had 2 libraries, the one downstairs where we kept all of our books in common, and the one upstairs, which is where he kept all the books he used in his work with the church. Now, by the time I was 12 years old, I had read all the books in his library. I was a very, very good reader, something that he insisted upon. He also insisted that we become and learn how to write correctly. And he would travel quite a bit in his work with the church, and he would write letters home to us. And in his letters, he would describe the places that he visited, the people that he met, the geography, the food that he ate. You see, even his letters to us were a way of helping with our education. And he insisted that we write letters. Now, when Orville was a little boy, he wrote this letter to him. Dear Father, I got your letter today. My teacher said I was a good boy. We have 45 in our room. The other day I took a machine can and filled it with water, then I put it on the stove. I waited a little while and the water came squirting out of the top about a foot. The old cat is dead. Love, Orville. So we became excellent readers and excellent writers. Even the toys that my father would bring home to us from his trips were a way to spark our curiosity and our interest. When I was 11 years old, he brought home this little small flying toy called a Panad helicopter. And when you would wind it up and let it go, it would fly around the room, and I was fascinated by it. It was the most fascinating thing that I had ever seen. So Orville and I took it, and we tried to make improvements on it and make bigger models and smaller models of it. But the memory of this little toy stayed with me my entire life. Now, my mother, Susan, grew up as the daughter of a buggy builder, the types of buggies that pulled behind horses at the time. And when she was a little girl, her father taught her to use tools. And she taught Orville and I how to use tools. One of the stories that I like to tell was about a big snowstorm in Dayton, and there were lots of snows in Dayton, but one year we didn't have a sled. My father was traveling, couldn't help us out. We had no money to buy one. So my mother said, I want you to do some research and then decide what the perfect sled would look like and then draw a very detailed picture of it. And then build it exactly like the picture. If it's right in the picture, it will be right when you build it. Well, Orville and I, well back then, boys and girls sat upright on their sleds, like in a little chair. So Orville and I believed that if we built our sled closer to the ground and longer, that the operator could actually lie down on it to cut down on the wind resistance. Then we put candle wax on the runners to make them slick. And it turned out that the sled we designed and built, with the help from our mother, would go farther and faster than any of the other sleds in Dayton. Now, we went to public school. This is a picture of me as a young boy, and I was a very good student. I dreamed of finishing high school, and I wanted to go to Yale University and become a teacher or maybe a minister like my father. I was also a very good athlete. I liked football and baseball. I was an accomplished gymnast, and I liked ice hockey. And once when I was 18 years old, I was playing in a particularly rough match one day. Someone on the other team swung or threw their stick, we're not quite sure which. It hit me in the face, knocked out 4 or 5 of my teeth, broke the bones, cut up my lips pretty badly, and the wounds became infected. And I was quite ill. In fact, I was really too sick to go back to school, and going to college was now out of the question. And because these dreams seemed to evaporate all of a sudden, I became very sad and very depressed. And for about 3 years, just sat around my home, not doing anything, not really helping out. My family was very considerate, gave me time for the wounds emotionally and physically to heal. But it wasn't until my mother became sick and I needed to take care of her that I got out of my depression. And I loved taking care of my mother, but my father traveled all the time, my brothers had moved on, so her care as well as running the household was my responsibility. But that is what finally lifted me out of my depression. Now, Orville was not quite such a good student. And Orville had another problem too. He got into mischief quite often. When he was in grammar school, one year in particular, he was supposed to be walking to school every morning. It turns out he was walking down to his friend's house, and they asked me to help him. We built a larger one, and we started printing a newspaper and brochures and pamphlets and things for the business around Dayton to advertise on, and that was our business for several years. Well, after that, the bicycle, the safety bicycle, was the rage around the United States, and both Orville and I had one. And we would use the time of riding around the country and talking and making plans for the future. And just like with the little flying toy and with the printing press and the sled, we began to work on our bicycles and make them better and make them faster. Orville became a very successful racer around Dayton. And then our friends began to bring their bikes to us to be repaired. So I convinced Orville in 1892 that we should open up a bicycle repair business, and it was very successful. Not only did we repair bikes, we started building them from scratch. Here's a picture of one of the first ones we made called the Van Cleve. So repairing and building bicycles was a good business. It was going very well, but I was still restless. I didn't think that the bicycle business was my life's calling, but I didn't know what that would be. I felt like there was some problem, some issue out there that I was meant to solve, but I didn't know what it was. Well, then Orville became sick with typhoid. And just like with my mother, his care was mostly my responsibility. And as he was recovering from his bout with typhoid, he would sleep for many hours, and I would sit by his bedside to keep him company. And while he would sleep, I would read. One day I was reading a magazine article from McClure's magazine about a German scientist named Otto Lilienthal. He had been experimenting with gliders. Not small ones, mind you, but ones actually large enough for someone to ride on. And this fascinated me, and I remembered the little flying toy that I had received when I was 11 years old, and I began to wonder if I could build a flying machine. Not just a glider, but a powered flying machine. And I wondered what it would take. Well, as Orville began to get better, we discussed that possibility. And I wrote a letter to the Smithsonian Institution, and I asked them for a list of publications about flying machines. And from that list, for the next 3 months, I developed a very extensive reading program, and I read everything that had been written up until that time about flying machines. I was a very good reader. From all that research, I determined that a successful powered flying machine would have 3 main parts. It would have to have some sort of lifting wings, a power plant or engine to push it through the air, and a control system. Now, the secret of lifting wings had been known for some time, and I can easily demonstrate that for you with this curved piece of paper. I'm going to be the wind, and I'm going to blow across the top of the paper. It doesn't go down as you might expect, it goes up. It's called the Bernoulli effect, and it's what makes all airplanes fly, even today. Now, the automobile had been invented by this time, and we thought that when it came time to put an engine on our flying machine, we would just buy one from the automobile manufacturers. So we weren't concerned about that. But the control system, that was different. The people who had been experimenting with flying machines up until this time, like Samuel Langley from the Smithsonian Institution, like Otto Lilienthal, like a man who became a friend and a mentor of ours who lived in Chicago named Octave Chanute, even Alexander Graham Bell. They had been experimenting, but they had not concerned themselves at all with the control system. But I was convinced that the solution to control would be the single most important problem to solve. And it was my experience with riding bicycles that led me to the solution. If you ride a bicycle and you're going to make a turn, you know that you've got to do a couple of things. You've got to turn the wheel and you have to lean. Well, turning the wheel is like a ship's rudder, and ships had been around for some time. It makes the rudder, now we didn't actually add the rudder until several years later, but it makes the flying machine do this, that's yaw. And then if you turn it horizontally, and we called it that in the beginning, a horizontal rudder, it makes the machine pitch. But rolling or leaning was a more complicated problem. I was in the bicycle shop one afternoon. A customer came in to buy an inner tube for his bike. It came in a box about like this. The ends were cut out. And I was just sort of playing with the box and talking to him and twisting it back and forth. And then I had an idea. What would happen if we twisted our wings? If we warped our wings? So that the wing on one side had more curve and more of that lifting force than the wing on the other side. And then we could reverse the warp, so that the wing on this side would have more curve. So by warping our wings or twisting our wings, we could make the flyer lean left or right, the rudder to make it yaw and pitch. It was called a 3-axis control system, and it was the first time anyone had thought of it. During all my research, I determined that an ideal place to test our flying machine would have steady winds, some wide open spaces, some small hills, and a soft place to land, probably sand. So I wrote a letter to the National Weather Service and I asked them for a list of those kind of places. They sent me a list of over 100 locations, and I wrote a letter to each one of them. I wrote a lot of letters. I received this reply back from a Mr. William Tate of Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. And I won't read all of it to you, but he says that this would be a fine place to test our machine. They have sandy land, steady winds, some small hills, and wide open spaces. He says I can get there from Elizabeth City, and they have daily mails and a telegraph. And he suggests we come in September or October for ideal weather. The weather in November or December is too harsh. And listen to his final paragraph. If you decide to try your machine here and come, I will take pleasure in doing all I can for your convenience and success and pleasure. And I assure you, you will find a hospitable people when you come among us. Well, I thought I would like Mr. Tate, so I decided that Kitty Hawk, North Carolina would be where we would test our machine. I didn't even tell him that I was coming. But in September, one evening, I left by train from Dayton, Ohio. I rode down to Norfolk, Virginia, and in a combination of another train and a steamer boat, I ended up in Elizabeth City, North Carolina. Should have been a short trip across the Albemarle Sound to Kitty Hawk. But in fact, it took me 3 days to find someone who even knew where Kitty Hawk was. It was so small. I did locate a ship's captain. His name was Israel Perry, and he was actually from Kitty Hawk, and he had a small boat called the Curlicue. Well, it turns out the Curlicue was not such a good boat. It leaked quite a bit. The sails were tattered and torn. The ropes were all rotting, as was the rudder post, and it was full of all sorts of mice and rats and vermin. But it was my only ride over, so I had to take it. We left one evening. Just as we had got out of sight of land, a huge storm came up, one of the worst I've ever seen, and I was quite afraid. The waves were crashing in the boat. I was bailing it out, hoping to keep it from sinking. The wind was so strong it actually ripped the sails off the mast. I really thought that this first trip to Kitty Hawk was going to be my last trip anywhere. But Captain Perry managed to sail the Curlicue into the New River Inlet. We waited for the storm to pass, made repairs, sailed on down the beach to Kitty Hawk. I went ashore and was met by a young man, a young boy named Elijah Baum, who showed me where the Tates lived. It's a picture of Mr. and Ms. Tate, a neighbor or friend of theirs, and their 2 little girls. Their house was very rudimentary, but they were very nice to me. Mrs. Tate made me a great big breakfast because she knew I had not eaten for so long. And then they invited me to stay with them, and I agreed, asking only for a pot of boiled water every morning in the hopes of avoiding typhoid like Orville had contracted. Well, I began to construct the first flyer in their front yard. Now the wings were covered with a material called muslin, and Mrs. Tate actually used her sewing machine to help me construct the wings. And when I left to go back to Dayton, not many people know this, I left this flyer with the Tates. Mrs. Tate cut the material off and made dresses for her little girls out of it. Well, Orville arrived a few weeks later, and we moved our camp down the beach a few miles, set up 2 tents, one to house the flyer, one to live in. Now, later on we built these 2 small shacks, but in the beginning we lived in the tents. Well, we started to test the flyer first as a kite to make sure the controls worked as we thought they should. And then finally we put weight on it to see how much it would lift. And then I climbed up on it and we started pushing it off the sand dunes. That was my flight training. It was on-the-job training. But it worked pretty well, and we were able to achieve glides of up to 400 feet by the end of that flying season. We went back to Dayton. The only problem was this machine did not lift as much as we had calculated it should have. So when we went back to Dayton for the winter, we decided to look at what Otto Lilienthal had done. And in his work, he had suggested what he thought would be the ideal wing shape. So we built a second glider, and in 1901 went back to Kitty Hawk once again. Well, the weather was terrible that year. It was cold at night, it was hot during the day, the wind was terrible, it blew sand and gravel and grass into everything, and the mosquitoes were so thick they often almost blotted out the sun. It was very tough work, but we persevered. But right away we knew something was wrong. The machine did not lift as much as the one the year before had, and the control system did not operate properly. I lost control of it several times, lots of times, with sometimes pretty spectacular crashes. We'd been at this for about 2 years, and for the first time I was actually afraid, and I was discouraged. We went back to Kitty Hawk, and on the way back I remarked to Orville that I didn't think man would fly for 1,000 years, and I was ready to give up. But when I got back home, I received an invitation from Octave Chanute, a scientist who lived in Chicago, inviting me to come to a very prestigious conference he was hosting and to present our findings before the scientists attending his conference. But I thought we had been a failure up until this time, and I didn't want to go. But at that point, my sister, Catherine, intervened, and she said, "No, Orville, Wilbur, you've got to go. You'll learn from them, and they'll learn from you." She borrowed clothes from Orville, so I'd be properly dressed. She packed me up and she shipped me off to Chicago. But before I went, I had to try to determine why did the flyer work well in 1900 but not work well in 1901? Could it be that Otto Lilienthal's data was incorrect? We had to find out, so we built this small wind tunnel, a wooden box about 6 feet long with a large fan in the end of it. And then we made models of wings out of hacksaw blades, hundreds of them, all different shapes and sizes. We tested them. It took several months. It was very methodical, often boring work. But in the end, we determined what we thought would be the ideal wing shape. We built a third glider. In 1902, went back to Kitty Hawk for the third time. Up until then, I had been doing all the flying. That year, Orville learned to fly, and this is a picture of me and Mr. Tate pushing Orville off one of the sand dunes. And guess what? Otto Lilienthal had been wrong, and we proved it. Well, we went back to Dayton for the winter, pretty happy with how things had gone. All we needed to do was add an engine. And remember, we weren't concerned about that. We would just buy one from the automobile manufacturers. Well, it turns out that was a problem. They were too heavy. You thought we would have thought of that, but we hadn't. And no automobile manufacturer was interested in building for us a one-of-a-kind, one-time, lightweight, powerful engine. Well, here's a story that not many people know. We had hired Charlie Taylor to work in our bicycle shop. He was a master machinist. We gave Mr. Taylor a very crude picture of what we thought we needed, and he built from scratch a small, lightweight, 12 horsepower engine out of aluminum. But it was the only one like it that had ever been built. We probably would have eventually flown, but if it had not been for Charlie Taylor, it would have taken quite some time. So we took this engine, another flyer, and we went back to Kitty Hawk for the 4th time. Now when we started to test the engine, it developed a crack. We had to ship it back to Dayton to be repaired. It took several weeks. We started to test it. It developed a crack again. This time, Orville took it himself because he was the better mechanic of the two of us. Rode all the way back to Dayton. He and Mr. Taylor made the repairs, changed some of the metallurgy to prevent further cracking. He got back to Dayton, or got back to Kitty Hawk, and we completed all the preparations by Saturday evening of December the 12th. The next day, the flying conditions were perfect. The machine was ready to go. We were excited. But we didn't fly that day because it was Sunday. And we had promised our father, the bishop, that we would not conduct flying experiments on the Sabbath. So we went for a walk, we fished, we visited some friends, and wrote letters. But the next day, December the 14th, we got up very early. We always did, and we started working as a team. I would fix breakfast while Orville would dress up and bathe. We wore coat and tie to go to work because our father had told us that's how you went to work. Then we reversed roles after breakfast. We put up a flag so that the men at the lifeguard station several miles away would know to come over and help us move the machine around. And then we flipped a coin. And on December the 14th, I won the toss. I would be the first. Now we were taking off and landing from this wooden rail. Our machine didn't have any wheels on it. It was about 60 feet long. The machine would slide along, take off, and then land in the sand. I climbed aboard. I nodded to Orville that I was ready. I released the rope. It started sliding down the rail. I got close to the end, and I pulled back on the controls, and it leapt into the air. And it leapt so fast that I over-controlled. I shoved it over, and it crashed back down. It only went less than 100 feet. When it landed, it broke part of the front runner. I scratched up my face a little bit, but I was not discouraged. I thought that if I had been a little better at it, had had more experience, that it might have worked. We spent the rest of that day making repairs. The next day took to finish it. And on December the 16th, the weather was terrible. And now we were starting to worry because we had promised our family we would be home by December the 24th, and we always kept our promises. So we really had to fly on December the 17th. Well, overnight, the weather had gotten bad. It had rained, the temperature had dropped down, it was bitterly cold. But like I said, we had to fly that day or give up for the year. It was Orville's turn. The people from the lifeguard station came over. One of them's name was John Daniels. We gave him our camera, told him to stand in this spot and to point it at the end of the rail, and then if the machine flew, to squeeze this bulb. We hoped we'd get a picture. And then we walked away from the crowd out by the left wing, and we shook hands. People that saw us that day said that it looked like two people saying goodbye for the very last time. But that wasn't the reason. The reason was we both thought that today something very special was going to happen. Orville climbed aboard. He looked over at me, said he was ready. He released the rope, holding it back on the rail. I was standing out by the right wing. I balanced it as long as I could keep up running along with it. I finally let go and stepped back. He got 40 feet down the rail, and it went into the air. It went up 12 feet, and it came down and almost touched, but it went back up, and he kept going up and down until finally the right wing contacted the sand. But it had flown for 12 seconds, 120 feet. And in those 12 seconds, that dream that I had had since I was 11 years old and saw the little flying toy had come true. Now after that, it was my turn. I flew it for 175 feet. Orville's turn, he flew it for a little over 200 feet. And then on the fourth attempt that day, I flew it for 852 feet for 59 seconds. We were pretty happy with how things had gone. But during the break, we didn't pay attention to the flyer. Wind came along, started tumbling it over and over and over like somebody had dropped an umbrella on the beach. And it was damaged pretty badly, and we knew that it would take some time to repair, and besides, we promised our family we'd be home for Christmas. So we packed up, went home, and for the next few years continued to improve on the machine. And then finally sold our invention to the French government and to the United States Army. Now people have asked me over the years, how did you and Orville do this thing? Let me back up and tell you one more story. When we did fly, I ran over to Mr. Daniels and I said, "Did you get the picture?" He said, "I was so excited when I saw it fly. I don't know if I And it took several weeks to develop the glass film, but Mr. Daniels had pressed it and got it just as it lifted off for the very first time in history. Well, the advantages of we grew up in a very good family. A father who made sure I learned to read and write. A mother who encouraged us to do things, taught us to use tools, and then Orville and I worked so well as a team. Now beyond that, there were experiences in our life that didn't seem so important at the time. For example, look at the flying machine and see these wooden runners on the front, the experiences that we gained sledding. Notice how Orville is lying down to cut down on the wind resistance, an experience that we achieved learning to sled. There's a chain drive between the engine and the propellers, the experience that we acquired working on bicycles. And I became a good reader, as I said, and a good writer. And there were other things that happened that seemed to be accidental at the time, like me getting hit in the face. If I had not been injured, I would have gone to college. I probably would have not taken the time to invent the airplane. If Otto Lilienthal had not published his work, if Orville had not been sick, there are lots of things. No one knows what happened to Ron Comac's magic stick. Maybe he dropped it in the Salmon River and it floated across the Albemarle Sound and was washed up on the beach that morning, and its magic just lifted the flyer. I don't know, but it is an example of the thrill and the excitement and the romance that has to do with flying. And it's what I like to call the spirit of Wilbur Wright. Now, I've rushed really fast through trying to tell you this story, and if anyone will permit, if you have a few questions about the Wright brothers, I'd be glad to entertain them. Yes, sir, in the back.
Since we have you here today, this is a great opportunity. North Carolina, Ohio, first in flight.
Well, if you got to hear or read the book by David McCullough, and I heard him speak over in Raleigh, the way we look at it, the way he looked at it, the way I look at it, the airplane was begat in Ohio, and it was born in North Carolina. And that's the way I like to look at it. Yes, sir.
Wilbur, I've taught sailing classes for years and years and years, but that is the finest explanation of the Bernoulli principle I have ever heard. My 10-year-old and 8-year-old grandchildren are struggling to understand why sunfish will fly into the wind, and so I'm going to show them your video. They're at homeschool, so you'll make it all the way to South Carolina by the end of the morning.
Well, in fact, most of my speeches are before fourth graders. I know it's North Carolina history.
Oh, you're on par.
So those are
Thank you ever so much.
tell me that his speech was generally for fourth graders. I told him he took it down 2 notches and he could. We're going to donate a book in your honor to the fourth grade. Thank you so much for coming this morning. We have one more job for you. If you'll pull a raffle and read the last 3 numbers for us.